My ex-husband invited me to his luxury wedding. During his toast, he smiled at the crowd and said, "Tonight I can finally leave the past behind." Years ago, his powerful family destroyed our marriage with fake medical records and lies that forced me to disappear from their lives. He thought I came to silently watch him marry another woman, but then the ballroom doors opened, and 3 grown adults walked in, carrying his face, his eyes, and DNA proof that they were the children he never knew existed. I'm grateful you're here for this story. Before we begin, leave me a quick comment. Have you ever had to face someone from your past who hurt you deeply? Yes or no is fine. Your voice matters here. Please note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling, but the lesson at the heart of it is what truly counts. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, cream-colored and heavy with a logo I hadn't seen in 32 years. I was 57 that November, and I had built a quiet life in Savannah, running an adult literacy program 3 days a week, tending the magnolia garden my mother had planted before she died, and protecting the careful silence I'd chosen 3 decades earlier. Most mornings followed the same rhythm: coffee on the front porch, newspaper spread across the wicker table, and the sound of wind moving through leaves that had outlived everyone who'd hurt me. The mail carrier handed me the stack at 8:15, same as always. Bills catalogs a newsletter from the community center, and underneath everything else, that envelope. The weight was wrong, too substantial for junk mail. The paper stock felt expensive under my fingertips, textured and cold. And there, embossed in the upper left corner, was the V I'd spent 3 decades trying to forget, elaborate serifs, curling like accusations, the Vane family crest, rendered in silver foil that caught the morning light. I set it on the table beside my coffee cup, told myself I didn't recognize it, told myself it was nothing. The newspaper had a story about Thanksgiving preparations, photographs of families gathering around tables laden with food they'd never finish. I read every word, absorbed none of them. My eyes kept drifting to that envelope, to the way my name had been written in calligraphy across the front, Ms. Imara Voss. Formal, distant, as if we'd never shared a bed or a last name, or the terrible intimacy of destruction. Some mornings arrive quietly, others arrive carrying the weight of 3 decades in a cream-colored envelope. I finished my coffee, watched a cardinal land on the magnolia branch nearest the porch. The tree was 40 years old now, planted by my mother when I was 17, and still believed that love could survive anything if you wanted it badly enough. The magnolia had outlasted my marriage, my mother, and every version of myself that had believed in forgiveness as a virtue rather than a choice. The cardinal flew away. I picked up the envelope. The flap opened easily, no resistance. Inside was a single card of ivory cardstock edges, gilt in gold lettering, engraved with the kind of precision that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The text was centered, traditional, unbearably elegant. Ashford Reginald Vane and Cordelia Ann Thorne request the honor of your presence at their marriage celebration. Thanksgiving Day, 2022. Vane Grand Hotel Manhattan. I read it 3 times before the words made sense, not because I didn't understand English, but because the reality they described seemed physically impossible. Ashford was getting married to someone named Cordelia Ann Thorne on Thanksgiving Day at the hotel his family had owned since before I was born, and he had invited me. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I'd imagined this moment in various forms over the years, seeing his name in print, hearing he'd remarried, learning he'd died. In every version I'd felt something: rage, grief, vindication. But sitting on my porch with the invitation in my lap, I felt only a cold, clear curiosity. Why would he do this? After 32 years of silence, why reach out now? Then I saw the handwriting. In the bottom right corner, in blue ink that had bled slightly into the expensive paper, someone had written a note in script I recognized immediately. It would be meaningful if you could witness this. Some things are better ended properly. No signature. He didn't need one. I knew his handwriting the way you know the shape of a scar intimately, permanently against your will. What do you do when the man who erased you from history sends you an invitation to watch him rewrite it again? I set the card down on the table with the same care I'd use handling broken glass. Placed my palms flat against the wicker surface and felt the texture press into my skin. Breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth the way the therapist I'd seen for 6 years had taught me. Some things are better ended properly, as if our marriage had simply faded, grown tired, run its natural course. As if I'd left because we'd fallen out of love instead of because his family had poisoned me, bribed a doctor to declare me infertile, and orchestrated my exit from New York society with the precision of a military campaign. As if 32 years of silence had been mutual instead of survival. He wanted me to come, to dress in something appropriate, to sit in a pew or a ballroom chair and watch him marry this Cordelia woman, to bear witness to his happiness, his continuation, his proof that whatever we'd been together had been successfully erased and replaced. It was the most Ashford thing I could imagine, turning even reconciliation into a performance of his superiority. I looked out at the magnolia tree again, thought about my mother who'd planted it the year I met Ashford at a gallery opening in Atlanta. She died while I was still married, still believing that her daughter had found security and love in equal measure. She never knew what the veins did to me. I'd protected her from that truth the way I'd later protect my children from their father. My children. I picked up the invitation one more time, studying Ashford's handwriting. The loops were as confident as I remembered the pressure of the pen, firm and unwavering. He had no idea that 6 months after I left New York, I'd discovered I was pregnant. No idea that the fertility diagnosis his family had paid for was a lie. No idea that I'd delivered triplets in a charity hospital in rural Georgia and raised them on a social worker's salary and sheer stubbornness. Caius, Lauren, Zara. 32 years old now with careers and lives and the Voss surname I'd reclaimed after the divorce. They knew about their father only as an absence, a deliberate blank space in the family story. I told them I'd leave that space empty until they asked to fill it. Zara had asked 3 months ago. I set the invitation down on my kitchen table and looked out at the magnolia tree my mother planted 40 years ago. Ashford Vane thought he was inviting me to witness an ending. He didn't know I had 3 children he'd never met. He didn't know what endings really looked like. My daughter would see that card before the sun set. My daughter walked through the door at 3 that afternoon and saw the invitation before I could hide it. Zara, 32, and working as an investigative journalist in Atlanta, froze in the doorway. Her eyes went straight to the cream envelope on my kitchen table, to the silver V embossed in the corner. I watched her face change, not confusion, but recognition. "Mom," she said slowly, "how do you know the Vane family?" I should have asked how she recognized it. Should have wondered why an emblem I hadn't seen in 32 years was familiar to my daughter, but I was too afraid of the answer. She picked up the invitation with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. Read it once, twice, then looked at me with eyes that belonged to a reporter, not a child. "I've seen this name before," she said quietly. "In files I shouldn't tell you about." "Zara." "No." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "I need you to tell me everything, today." I went to the kitchen, did what I always did when emotions got too big for words. I started cooking, pulled out the cast iron skillet, found chicken and vegetables. My hands moved through familiar motions while my mind tried to find a way to protect my daughter from a truth she'd apparently already started hunting. Zara followed me, leaned against the counter, phone in hand, watching me the way she must watch people she interviews. Patient, relentless. "I'm calling Caius and Lauren," she said. "Whatever this is, we all need to hear it." She made the calls while I cooked. I heard her tell Caius to get on a plane from Atlanta, heard her tell Lauren to drive down from Boston tonight, no excuses. Heard her voice crack once when Lauren asked what was wrong. "I don't know yet," she told him, "but Mom does." Silence is a house you build brick by brick. It takes 32 years to construct and one daughter's question to crack the foundation. They arrived by 11 that night. Caius first still in his work suit, my son, who'd become a litigation attorney, with the kind of cold precision that made opposing counsel nervous. Then Lauren, who'd driven 4 hours from Boston. My other son, who'd become an interventional cardiologist. The irony had never been lost on me, given that the man whose family had tried to erase me would one day owe his life to my son's hands. We sat in my living room with the lights turned low. Caius took the armchair with his legal pad out. Lauren sat on the couch. Zara perched on the arm of my chair, close enough to touch. "Tell us," Caius said, not a question. So I did. I told them about the marriage they'd never known I had, about meeting Ashford Vane at a gallery opening in Atlanta in 1989, me at 25 with a degree in education and student loans, him at 28 heir to a real estate empire with a smile that made me believe I could be the exception to every rule about money and class and family dynasties. I told them about the wedding in June 1990, about his mother Constance who hated me from the moment we met, about the 8 months of marriage where I slowly realized that love wasn't enough when the other person's family had unlimited money and a determination to protect their legacy. How do you tell your children that the reason they never knew their father is because you were erased like a mistake in ink? I told them about the doctor's appointment in October 1990, the fertility tests Constance insisted I take, the results declaring me infertile, severe ovarian dysfunction, the report said, permanent, untreatable. I told them about Ashford's face when the doctor delivered the news, how within a week Constance had hired lawyers to draw up divorce papers. I told them about the NDA. What NDA, Lauren's voice was careful controlled. The one Constance made me sign before they'd agree to the divorce settlement. The one that said I could never speak publicly about the marriage, the Vane family, or the circumstances of our separation. The one I signed while sedated in a psychiatric facility where Ashford's mother had me committed for 72 hours. Caius didn't interrupt. Lauren closed his eyes. Zara didn't take her eyes off me. 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant. By then, I was living in rural Georgia, working as a teacher's aide. The fertility diagnosis was a lie. All of it was a lie. And I couldn't tell anyone because I'd signed that document. When I finished, Caius said, "Do you still have it?" I retrieved it from my bedroom safe. The document I hadn't looked at in 3 decades but had carried through 4 moves and 1,000 nightmares. Yellowed paper signatures in faded blue ink legal language that had bound my tongue for 32 years. Caius read it in 15 minutes. His face showed nothing the same expression he probably wore in court when dismantling someone's case. When he looked up, his eyes were cold and clear. "This is invalid," he said. "Signed under duress. No independent counsel present. Illegal permanent silence clause. This document has no legal validity. It never did." I breathed for the first time in 32 years. Caius set the NDA on the coffee table like evidence in a trial. "This took 32 years to collapse," he said, but it collapsed in exactly 15 minutes when the right person read it. Lauren and Zara stared at the yellowed document. My son looked at me with a lawyer's cold precision and said 4 more words. "Now we build the case." By 7 the next morning, Caius was already at his desk in Atlanta. He told me later that he'd barely slept, just sat in his hotel room near my house, reading and rereading that document until the words blurred together. Then he'd driven back to his office on the 22nd floor of a glass tower downtown, spread the yellowed NDA across his desk like a dissection, and started marking violations with a red pen. I wasn't there to watch him work, but I know my son. I know the way his mind moves through legal language, the way a surgeon's hands move through tissue, precise, methodical looking, for the weak points that will make the whole structure collapse. He identified 3 critical flaws before his assistant arrived at 8. First, the document was signed under duress, not the legal fiction of duress where someone feels pressured, actual documentable duress. I'd signed it while still sedated from whatever medication they'd given me during my involuntary psychiatric hold. The signature was shaky. The date stamp showed it was executed inside the facility. Any first-year law student could argue that point successfully. Second, no independent legal counsel. The NDA stated I'd been advised to seek representation, but there was no signature from any attorney representing my interests. The only lawyers present had been Constance Vanes. In New York, that alone made it challengeable. Third, the permanent silence clause. Caius told me this was the fatal flaw, the one that would have invalidated everything, even if the first two hadn't existed. You cannot contract away someone's right to speak about fraud committed against them. It violates public policy. The document tried to silence me forever about actions that were themselves illegal. Mom. He told me later, over the phone, his voice carrying that cold precision he uses in court. This document was designed to look intimidating, but it was built on sand. Legal documents are walls built from words. It takes a skilled eye to see where the foundation cracks. At 8:30, Caius called Marcus Whitfield, a New York attorney who specialized in employment coercion cases. They'd met at a conference 3 years ago and had referred clients to each other ever since. Caius scanned the NDA, sent it encrypted, and waited, while Marcus reviewed it on his screen in Manhattan. The call lasted 6 minutes. Caius. Marcus said, his voice tinny through the speakerphone. I've seen coerced NDAs before. This one is a textbook example of what not to do. The permanent silence clause alone kills it. You can't contract away someone's right to speak about fraud committed against them. So we can move forward, Caius asked. You can dismantle them, Marcus said. Statute of limitations on the fraud might be complicated, but defamation and emotional distress claims are absolutely viable if your evidence is solid. And from what you're telling me, your evidence is your mother's life. Caius recorded in his legal pad NDA void 3 separate grounds. Proceed. While Caius was building the legal framework in Atlanta, Lauren was in Boston doing what he does best, finding medical truth in a system designed to hide it. He called me at 10 that morning, his voice careful in the way it gets when he's trying to control his emotions. Mom, I need you to give me permission to access any medical records filed under your name or maiden name from 1990 to 1995, New York Presbyterian specifically. I gave him permission. Signed the release form he emailed. Didn't ask what he expected to find because I was afraid I already knew. Lauren has privileges at 3 hospitals and access to a national medical records database through his work as an interventional cardiologist. The system is bureaucratic slow and leaves a digital trail of every search, but it works. By noon, he'd navigated through archived files from New York Presbyterian Hospital, where Dr. Reginald Ashe had practiced 30 years ago. He searched for records under Monroe Imara, my maiden name, and found them, digitized in 2008 during a system-wide archival project. Everything was there. Test results, lab panels, consultation notes. Then he searched for vein A with a birth year of 1963. He told me later that he sat staring at the search results for a full minute before opening them, that he'd thought he was ready to see whatever truth was buried in those files. He wasn't. There's a particular kind of rage that comes from reading a lie printed on official letterhead with a doctor's signature at the bottom. Lauren opened 2 files side by side on his computer screen. The first was my reproductive endocrinology panel from October 1990. Every parameter within normal range. Hormone levels healthy. Ovarian function optimal. At the bottom of the report in clinical language that left no room for interpretation, no complications detected. Fertility status, normal. The second file was labeled Vein A-DOB, 1963. Reproductive consultation, same month, same doctor. The report used different language, more careful, more deferential, but the medical findings were clear: oligospermia, significantly reduced sperm count, and motility. Recommendation: consider fertility intervention options. Lauren reads these reports every day. He's a cardiologist who specializes in saving hearts that have failed, and now he was reading proof that his own father's family had broken his mother's life deliberately. He knows what normal looks like. He knows what problems look like. He knew staring at those 2 reports exactly what had happened. They'd known the truth in 1990, known that I was healthy and Ashford was the one with fertility issues. And they'd blamed me anyway, paid a doctor to falsify my results, made me carry the shame of being called barren while their son's medical problems were quietly documented and hidden. The phone call came at 12:15. I was sitting on my porch with cold coffee waiting. "Mom," Loren said, and his voice was shaking. "They knew all of it." "Tell me." "Your results were perfect. His were the problem. Oligospermia, low sperm count. And they made you carry the shame for 32 years. I closed my eyes, felt the sun on my face warm and indifferent. He told me later that he had to step outside for 20 minutes because the rage made his hands shake. I would tell people when I recounted this story. But in that moment, sitting on my porch, all I felt was a cold, clear certainty. Loren sat in his Boston office staring at 2 medical files from 1992, one showing my perfect health, one showing Ashford's fertility problems. My son, who'd spent his career helping women through difficult pregnancies, was looking at proof that the Vane family had known the truth all along. He called Zara next, his voice still shaking. "I need you to find out what else they're hiding." When Loren called asking what else the Vanes were hiding, my daughter didn't tell him she'd been asking that same question for 4 years. Zara answered on the second ring. I wasn't on the call, but Loren told me later what happened, how his voice was shaking when he said he'd found the medical records, how Zara went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before she spoke. "The medical fraud isn't the only thing they're hiding," she said. "What do you mean?" "I need to show you something. Can you get to Atlanta tonight?" Zara. "Tonight, Loren, bring Caius. I'll explain everything when you're here." She hung up, walked to her bedroom closet in her small Atlanta apartment, and pulled out a locked metal filing box she'd hidden behind winter coats and old textbooks. The box was heavier than it looked. She'd been filling it for 4 years without telling anyone. She sat on her living room floor with the box in front of her and didn't open it yet. Just put her hands on the cold metal and breathed. Later, she would tell me she'd been waiting for this moment, not hoping for it, waiting for it. The way you wait for a storm you've watched building on the horizon. But first, I need to tell you how it started. 4 years ago, in September 2018, Zara was 28 years old and working as a junior investigative reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She was good at her job, patient, thorough, willing to spend months on a single story if the evidence led somewhere real. That fall, she was investigating a municipal corruption case involving Atlanta city contracts. A source leaked corporate documents, hundreds of pages of NDAs and settlement agreements from various companies doing business with the city. Zara was scrolling through the files at her desk, flagging relevant names and dates, when one name stopped her cold. Imara Monroe, 1992, my maiden name. The name I'd carried until I married Ashford Vane and spent 8 months pretending I belonged in rooms that had never been built for people like me. She sat frozen at her desk for 10 minutes. The newsroom moved around her phones, ringing editors shouting across cubicles, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and she stared at those 2 words on her computer screen. "Mom." She told me later, "I saw your maiden name and I just stopped breathing." The NDA was heavily redacted. Black bars covered most of the text, but she could see enough Vane Holdings as the primary party. Medical confidentiality mentioned twice, a permanent silence clause, a settlement amount redacted but clearly substantial based on the surrounding language. She'd grown up knowing I'd been married before, that the marriage had ended badly, that I didn't talk about it and they shouldn't ask. I'd raised 3 children on a teacher's salary, and sheer stubbornness never touching support from anyone never explaining why. Now she knew there had been money and silence and a family powerful enough to make both happen. That's when I started digging, she told me, not as a daughter, as a reporter. There are some secrets daughters carry to protect their mothers, and some they carry because they're terrified of what the truth will ask them to do. Over the next 4 years, Zara built a case the way journalists do, slowly, carefully documenting everything. She filed FOIA requests for Vane Holdings corporate records, tracked Dr. Reginald Ash's medical license history, and found 3 complaints filed against him in the 1990s, all quietly settled. Found the $85,000 transfer in 2019 buried in a subsidiary account labeled as a medical consulting fee to Dr. Ash's private practice. She interviewed former Vane estate staff anonymously, found a housekeeper who'd worked there in 1990 and remembered me, the young wife who cried in the garden. Found a driver who'd taken me to the psychiatric facility who said he'd thought it was wrong but hadn't said anything because Constance Vane paid his salary. Every lead pointed to orchestrated fraud. Every document suggested a family that had used money and power to rewrite reality. How do you investigate your own mother's past without asking her a single question? Zara told me she tried to bring it up a dozen times, would sit across from me at dinner or during our Sunday phone calls and feel the words building in her throat. But every time she'd see the careful piece I'd built over 3 decades and couldn't bring herself to shatter it. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, she said. The truth is, I was terrified of what the answers would be. She found the witness list in 2020, built the financial timeline in 2021, identified every person who'd been complicit, the doctor, the lawyers, the family members who'd known and said nothing. She had everything except the one thing that mattered: my permission to use it. 6 months ago, she'd written the article, titled it, "The Vane Deception: How Medical Fraud Destroyed a Marriage." 12,000 words, meticulously sourced, devastating in its precision. She'd shown it to her editor, who'd wanted to publish immediately. Zara had said no, not yet, not without asking me first. But she'd never asked, because asking would require explaining, and explaining would require me to relive it. So the article sat in her drafts folder while she kept investigating, kept documenting, kept building the case, until Lauren called. That Friday evening, Zara opened the locked box. Inside was everything: printed documents, organized by date, witness, contact information, financial records with transactions highlighted in yellow, photographs of the Vane estate, copies of my original marriage certificate and divorce decree that she'd obtained through public records. At the bottom was a flash drive labeled "Final Evidence Audio Interviews." She spread it all across her dining table. 4 years of work. The complete dismantling of a lie that had shaped my entire adult life. She called Caius first, then Lauren. "We need to talk, all of us, tonight." Then she called me. "Mom." She said, her voice steady in a way that meant she was holding back tears. "I have something to show you. I've had it for a long time. I just needed to know you were ready to use it." "What is it?" "Everything. I have everything." That night, she laid out 4 years of investigation on her dining table. Every document, every witness name, every financial trail that led back to the Vane family. She'd written the article 6 months ago and never published it because she was waiting for one thing: for me to be ready. She called her brothers and said 3 words that changed everything. "Mom is ready." Everett Kane called me that Sunday evening and said 6 words: "I have something for you." Zara had just finished showing me 4 years of investigation. My hands were still shaking when my phone rang and I heard the voice of the man who'd been my friend since those early, desperate days in Savannah. Everett Kane was 61 now, a retired contractor who'd sold his own house 32 years ago to help pay the medical bills when my triplets were born premature in a charity hospital. He'd been the one person outside my children who knew fragments of my story, not because I'd told him everything, but because he'd been there for the parts that required practical help instead of sympathy. "Come to my house," he said. "I've been holding something for you. Someone asked me to keep it safe in case you ever needed it." I drove to his log cabin on the edge of Savannah as the sun was setting. Everett met me on the porch, looking older but steady. "I didn't know if this day would come," he said. Part of me hoped it wouldn't have to. We sat in his living room. He brought out a small wooden box, weathered but carefully kept, and set it on the coffee table between us. "Someone sent this to me in 1993, he said, "with instructions to keep it safe, to give it to you if you ever needed proof." Who? I don't know. The package came with a type note, no signature. But whoever it was knew what they were doing was wrong. He opened the box. Inside was a hospital bill from 1992, some old receipts, and an envelope with my handwriting on it, yellowed with age still sealed. "This is a copy of a letter you wrote," Everett said. "The original was intercepted. Someone made sure you'd have proof it existed." I picked up the envelope, my own handwriting from 32 years ago. My hands started shaking. "Do you want to read it now?" he asked. I didn't, but I needed to. I opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside was thin, the ink faded but clear. "Dear Ashford, I'm writing this from Georgia, where I've been living since I left New York. I think I'm carrying your child. I need you to know. The doctors your mother paid to call me infertile were wrong, or they lied, or I don't know what happened. But I'm 3 months along now. Whatever you decide, I will not come back to a place that made me feel worthless. But you deserve to know the truth. If you want to be involved, you can reach me through Everett Kane in Savannah. Imara." The letter was dated October 15th, 1992. What the letter didn't say, what I'd never told anyone, was how. After signing the NDA, I'd agreed to one final meeting at Ashford's insistence in March 1992 in a neutral hotel in Atlanta. He said he wanted to apologize in person. I went because I still believed even then that he was capable of remorse. What happened between us that evening was brief and complicated, and as it turned out, consequential. I left before morning. I never contacted him again. 7 months later, I discovered I was pregnant. Some letters arrived too late to change the past, but they can still rewrite the story people tell about what happened. "He never got this," I said. Everett nodded. "No, but now you can prove you tried." I read the letter 3 times. Each time I saw a different version of myself, the woman who'd written it desperate and alone. The woman who'd spent 32 years thinking maybe she should have tried harder. The woman sitting in Everett's living room realizing she had tried and someone had made sure the message never arrived. "This changes everything," I said. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope, held it in both hands like the fragile, dangerous thing it was. Proof that I hadn't abandoned Ashford or hidden his children out of spite. Proof that I'd done the right thing and been erased anyway. There's a particular kind of vindication that comes from reading your own words, written in innocence, before the world taught you to doubt yourself. I thanked Everett, drove home with the wooden box on my passenger seat, sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. Then at 11 that night, my phone rang again. The voice on the other end was elderly female trembling. "Is this Imara Voss?" "Yes. My name is Opaline Marsh. I was the housekeeper at the Vane estate in 1992. I saw something I should have told someone about 32 years ago." I sat up straighter. "What did you see?" "I watched Constance Vane put something in your tea that morning. The morning they took you away. I took the vial after you left. I've kept it all these years." My breath stopped. I couldn't throw it away. Opaline continued her words, coming faster. "Every time I tried, I thought, what if she needs proof someday, so I kept it, in a box in my closet. I've moved 3 times and I still have it." "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I saw your name on a guest list. Isadora Vane showed it to me. She still calls me sometimes. She said her brother was getting married and you were invited. And I thought she needs to know. She needs to know someone saw." Her voice broke completely. "I can't sleep because of it. I need you to have this. I need you to know I saw what they did." I closed my eyes. Opaline Marsh, 68 years old, had been a housekeeper at the Vane estate in 1992, and she'd kept a small vial of medicine for 32 years because her conscience wouldn't let her throw it away. "Where are you?" I asked. "Connecticut, but I can mail it to you or bring it, whatever you need." "I need it," I said. "I need everything you remember." That night, I realized the Vane family's carefully constructed lie was held together by people, and some of those people were finally ready to tell the truth. There are truths you tell once and truths you tell twice the second time with all the parts you were too ashamed to say the first time. Tuesday night, 2 days before Thanksgiving, I sat my 3 children down again. Opaline's confession was still ringing in my ears. Everett's wooden box sat on my coffee table. Zara's 4 years of investigation were spread across her dining table in Atlanta. We had evidence now, medical records, financial trails, witness testimony. But I hadn't told them everything yet. Some details are too heavy to release all at once. "There's more," I said. Caius set down his pen. Lauren leaned forward. Zara went very still, the way she does when a source is about to say something that changes the story. I told them about the photos. 2 weeks after the falsified fertility diagnosis, Constance Vane orchestrated one final piece of evidence. She hired someone who looked like me from behind, brown skin, similar build, same hair length. Put her in a hotel room with a man I'd never met. Took photographs in shadow and dim lighting, careful angles that showed bodies but obscured faces. The photos looked like proof of adultery, like I'd been unfaithful, like I'd given Ashford a reason to divorce me that had nothing to do with his family's cruelty or their lies about my fertility. They weren't pictures of you. Lauren's voice was very quiet. No, but they were close enough. Same skin tone, same hair, similar frame. In dim hotel lighting, taken from behind or in profile, close enough to be convincing if you wanted to believe them. Caius was already writing. This was conspiracy to defraud a marriage. This is prosecutable even now. Fraud has no statute of limitations when it's this systematic. Zara's hands were shaking. Did you tell anyone? Did you explain they weren't you? I tried, but I'd just been declared mentally unstable by their doctor. I'd been involuntarily committed for 72 hours. Who would believe me when I said the photos weren't real, especially when Constance had documentation, medical reports, a psychiatric hold record, all of it, painting me as unstable, paranoid, delusional. A lie built with photographs is still built on sand, but sand can bury you if there's enough of it. They needed the photos. I continued. Because the fertility diagnosis alone wasn't enough. Ashford could have been blamed for that. His family would have looked cruel for abandoning me over a medical condition. But adultery, that made me the villain. That made the Vane family look justified in cutting me off. I told them about the moment Ashford threw the photos on the table in front of me. His mother, Constance, standing behind him, arms crossed, face composed. I'd looked at the images and felt my reality fracturing, seeing my body but knowing it wasn't my body seeing evidence of something I'd never done. This isn't me, I'd said. Ashford had looked at me with something colder than anger. Disappointment, maybe, or relief that he'd been given an excuse. The truth is not as important as the Vane reputation, he'd said. You will sign the NDA and disappear quietly, or we will release these to your family, your employer, everyone you know. I'd begged him to look at me, to actually see me instead of seeing what his mother needed him to see. But he'd turned away. He chose his mother's lie over my truth, I told my children, not because he didn't know better, because protecting the Vane name mattered more than protecting me. Telling your children that their father chose power over truth is different from living it alone for 3 decades. Lauren closed his eyes. Caius's jaw tightened so hard I heard his teeth. Zara stared at me with a reporter's fury, the kind that finds injustice and refuses to let it stand. That was the moment I understood, I said. I wasn't fighting one person. I was fighting a system designed to erase people like me. People without family, money, or legal resources or the right connections. The system worked exactly the way it was designed to work. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then I told them about the letter, the one I'd written 3 months after fleeing to Georgia, October 1992. I was working as a teacher's aide, living in a room I rented by the week, and I'd realized I was pregnant. Despite everything they'd done to prove I was infertile, my body had proven them wrong. I'd written to Ashford, not to his family estate, but to his private office address. A short letter saying I believed I was carrying his child and he deserved to know. The letter never arrived. For 32 years, I'd assumed his secretary had intercepted it, or Constance, someone loyal to the family who'd made sure Ashford never saw evidence that I'd tried to reach him. Zara looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Mom," she said carefully, "it wasn't Constance who intercepted your letter." I stared at her. I found email records during my investigation. From 2010, Isadora Vane Ashford's sister admitting to Cordelia Thorne that she'd intercepted a letter from you in 1992. She said she destroyed it. She said she regretted it. The room tilted. Isadora Vane, I said slowly. Not Constance, not a secretary. His sister, Zara, confirmed. She pulled out her laptop, opened a file, turned the screen toward me. She sent this to Cordelia 18 years ago. Look. I read the email. Isadora's words in plain text. I intercepted a letter from Imara in 1993. She said she was pregnant. I panicked. I brought it to Cordelia instead of to you. I told myself I was protecting you both. Cordelia destroyed it. I let her, and I've regretted it every day since. I'd been blaming the wrong person for 3 decades. Constance Vane had orchestrated the medical fraud, the photos, the psychiatric hold. But the letter, the one chance I'd had to tell Ashford about his children that had been stopped by the quiet younger sister I'd barely noticed at family dinners. Isadora Vane, the woman I'd thought was just a bystander, the one who'd smiled politely and said nothing. She was the reason my children grew up without their father. Zara showed me the full email thread on her laptop. Isadora admitting to Cordelia that she'd intercepted my letter and regretted it. For 32 years, I'd imagined Constance's cruelty as the final barrier. I was wrong. It was his sister, the quiet one, who smiled politely at dinner and said nothing. The one I'd barely noticed was the one who made sure my children grew up without their father. Lauren went quiet for a long time after Zara's revelation about Isadora, then said, "I need to tell you about a patient I saved 6 years ago. We were still sitting in my living room. It was past midnight now, technically Wednesday morning, 2 days before Thanksgiving, 2 days before the wedding. 2016. Lauren said, his voice careful. I was 26 in my residency at Boston General. A cardiac emergency came in. 53-year-old man, no ID, initially brought in unconscious. Massive myocardial infarction. He was coding when they wheeled him in. Caius set down his pen. Zara leaned forward. I spent 8 hours stabilizing him. Lauren continued. It was one of the first critical saves I did mostly on my own. My attending let me lead. I remember thinking this is what I trained for, saving someone who was minutes from death. What was his name? I asked, though I already knew. Could feel it coming like a storm. Once his ID arrived, the chart said R. Vane. Date of birth, 1963. The room went silent. You're saying you saved Ashford Vane's life? Caius's voice was flat. Lauren nodded, without knowing it. The name meant nothing to me in 2016. We'd never heard it. Mom never told us. I closed my eyes. My son had saved his father's life, and neither of them had known they were connected. Or had they? Tell me about that night, I said. Lauren described it: the emergency room, the patient coding the controlled chaos of a cardiac team working against time. He'd performed CPR, called for defibrillation, threaded the catheter himself, while his attending supervised. 8 hours of surgery and stabilization. The patient had survived. I didn't see him awake, Lauren said. He was transferred to another floor after being stabilized. Standard procedure. I moved on to the next emergency. He paused, his hands folded in his lap. The attending said I had good instincts, that I'd be an excellent physician. I felt proud. I'd saved a life. What do you do when you realize you saved the life of the man who tried to erase your mother from existence? 3 days later, Loren continued, his voice quieter now. An envelope arrived at the nurse's station, addressed to Dr. L. Voss. Inside was a handwritten note. What did it say? Zara asked. Lauren pulled out his phone, opened his photos, handed it to me. He'd kept a picture of the note. The handwriting was familiar. I'd seen it on divorce papers on the wedding invitation that started all of this. Thank you for saving a life that may not deserve saving. No signature, just those 10 words. I kept the original note for years, Loren said. I thought it was strange, almost suicidal. I wondered if I should report it to psych, but the patient had been discharged by then. I filed it away and mostly forgot about it. He looked at me, his eyes wet. He saw my name badge. Dr. L. Voss. He knew. He knew I was his son, and he still walked away. That note wasn't gratitude, Caius said softly. It was guilt. He knew I'd saved his life. Lauren said, and he'd never once tried to find us, never looked for Mom, never wondered if we existed. And when his own son, his voice broke. When his own son saved him from dying on an operating table, he left a note and disappeared again. I watched my son process the weight of having saved the life of the man who'd destroyed mine. The irony was so perfect it hurt. Zara was already typing on her laptop. "This is evidence, pattern of evasion. He's known since 2016 that he has at least one child. We can prove he knew," Caius said. "The note is proof. He saw the name Voss and connected it." We talked until 3 in the morning. Then Caius drove back to Atlanta, Lauren to his hotel, Zara to her apartment. I sat alone in my living room with the dawn coming through my windows and thought about my son's hands saving his father's life. By 9 that morning, Caius was at his office on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in Atlanta. I wasn't there, but he called me later and told me everything. He'd spent the morning finalizing 3 lawsuits. The first defamation, false claims of infertility and mental instability that damaged my reputation and employment prospects. The second, fraudulent inducement, the coerced NDA signed under duress. The third, intentional infliction of emotional distress, 32 years of systematic erasure. Each one was meticulously documented. Medical records, financial trails, witness statements, the invalid NDA, Opaline's forthcoming testimony, Lauren's note from Ashford, every piece of evidence we'd gathered. Marcus Whitfield came to his office around 10. "These lawsuits are solid, Caius," Marcus said, reviewing the documents. "But filing them publicly will destroy Vane Holdings. The stock will collapse. You're talking about institutional liability for fraud. Some courtrooms have judges and juries, others have wedding guests and champagne. Both can deliver verdicts." "I'm not filing them," Caius said. Marcus looked up, confused. "I'm presenting them," Caius continued, "tomorrow night in front of 400 witnesses." "At the wedding?" "At the wedding." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're going to lay out the evidence publicly. Make it a spectacle. I'm going to give him exactly what he gave my mother," Caius said. "Public humiliation, the destruction of his reputation in front of everyone who matters to him. But unlike what he did to her, what I'm doing is true." "This isn't legal proceedings, Caius. This is justice," Caius said. "Our court is that ballroom, and the verdict will be delivered before he says his vows." When Caius told me this on the phone, I felt something cold and clear settle in my chest. My son had built a trap. Not a legal one, a social one. The kind that works on people who care more about reputation than truth. Caius laid 3 pristine lawsuits on his desk. Defamation, fraud, emotional distress, each one meticulously documented and ready to destroy the Vane family in court. Then he told Marcus he wasn't filing them. He was presenting them. Tomorrow night, in a ballroom full of Manhattan's elite, he would lay out 32 years of evidence and let Ashford Vane face judgment from the only jury that mattered, everyone he'd ever wanted to impress. While Caius was building the legal trap, Zara was building the media one. Wednesday morning, the day before Thanksgiving, my daughter sat in her Atlanta apartment with her laptop open and her phone in hand. She told me later about the 3 calls she made, each one carefully calibrated to plant a seed without revealing the garden. First call, New York Times, a contact she'd cultivated over 2 years of professional networking. "I'm not asking you to publish anything yet," she said. "I'm asking you to have someone in the room tomorrow night when history corrects itself. A prominent Manhattan family, medical fraud, corporate conspiracy, Vane Grand Hotel, 7 p.m. The contact asked for details. Zara said, "Trust me, if you're not there, you'll be chasing this story for weeks, trying to piece together what everyone else witnessed live." Second call, Washington Post. Same pitch, slightly different angle. "Think about what happens when old money meets modern accountability. Tomorrow night. Be there." Third call, an investigative TV network that specialized in exposés. 400 witnesses. Documentary quality scandal. And I promise you, the bride doesn't know what's coming. Zara told me later, "Journalists hate missing stories. I just had to make them afraid of missing this one." She gave them enough prominent family medical fraud Manhattan wedding, but not the names, not the specifics, not enough to publish early and spoil the moment, just enough to get cameras and reporters dispatched to what they thought would be a society wedding. Journalism is the art of knowing which truth to tell when. Zara knew the timing mattered as much as the content. That afternoon, she opened the file she'd been working on for 4 years, the article that had consumed her nights and weekends while she worked her day job covering municipal corruption. 8,000 words meticulously sourced, footnoted, devastating in its precision. The title, The Vain Deception: How Medical Fraud Destroyed a Family. The opening paragraph read, "For 32 years, Amara Voss carried the burden of a lie she never told. This is the story of how a prominent Manhattan family used money, medical fraud, and systematic gaslighting to erase a woman from her own marriage, and how 3 children she raised alone are now demanding accountability." The article was complete except for the conclusion. Zara texted Lauren, "Send me the medicine vial test results by 8 p.m. tomorrow. That's the final piece." She told me over the phone, "Mom, I've been a reporter for 9 years. This will be the most important story I ever write. And I need you to know it's not revenge. It's record-setting. It's making sure what happened to you is documented so it can't happen to someone else." I believed her. My daughter had turned her anger into precision. But there was one more piece of evidence I hadn't known about until Lauren told me that Wednesday evening. Something that had happened 2 months earlier in September that he'd kept quiet while he processed what it meant. Lauren called me around 6. "Mom, I need to tell you about Dr. Reginald Ashe." The name hit me like a physical blow. The doctor who'd signed my falsified fertility records. The man whose signature had destroyed my marriage. "He's dead," Lauren said. "Died 3 weeks ago, but before he did, he called me." Lauren described it September 2022, a Tuesday morning in Boston. A hospital social worker had called him, saying an elderly terminal patient in palliative care was requesting to see Dr. Lauren Voss specifically. Lauren didn't recognize the name Reginald Ashe, but went anyway. Professional courtesy for a dying patient. Dr. Ashe was 70 years old in the late stages of pancreatic cancer, skeletal, barely able to sit up, but lucid. The moment Lauren walked in, the old man's eyes went to his name badge. "Are you Amara Monroe's son?" Dr. Ashe had asked. Lauren froze. "How do you know my mother?" "I'm the doctor who destroyed her life in 1992. Lauren told me he almost walked out, but something in the old man's voice, guilt that had calcified into physical pain, made him stay. Some people find courage in youth and carry it through life. Others find it only when death takes away everything they were afraid of losing. Dr. Ashe told Lauren everything. Constance Vane had approached him in May 1992 with a proposal. She needed documentation that her daughter-in-law was infertile. She needed it to look medical official, unquestionable, and she was willing to pay. $85,000, transferred from a Vane Holdings subsidiary account to his private practice. "I was weak," Dr. Ashe told Lauren. "I told myself it was just paperwork, just numbers on a form, but I knew what I was doing. I destroyed a woman's credibility and her marriage." Then he handed Lauren a USB drive. "I recorded a confession," Dr. Ashe said. "Last week, hospital witness present, legally dated. Everything my name, the date, the amount, what I did, and why. I also included bank records showing the transfer. It's all there." "Why now?" Lauren asked. "Because dying doesn't forgive you," Dr. Ashe said. "Only the person you hurt can do that. And I needed to ask. The video is dated and witnessed. It will hold up in any court. Give it to your mother. Let her decide what to do with it." Dr. Ashe died 3 weeks after that conversation. Lauren kept the USB drive in his office safe, waiting for the moment I would be ready. That moment was tomorrow night. When Lauren finished telling me this, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time in weeks. Not from grief, from the weight of validation. A dying man had spent his final conscious days trying to undo what he'd done to me. It didn't erase 32 years, but it proved I hadn't been crazy or paranoid or wrong. Dr. Reginald Ashe's video confession was recorded with a hospital witness present, legally dated, and included bank transfer records, showing exactly $85,000 paid by a Vane Holdings subsidiary to his medical practice in May 1992, 2 weeks before my test results were officially recorded. Tomorrow night, that video would play on a ballroom screen while 400 people watched a dying man tell the truth his conscience couldn't carry to the grave. That same Wednesday evening in Manhattan, while we prepared Dr. Ash's confession and finalized our evidence, Amara Griffin asked her mother a question that would unravel 32 years of carefully maintained family silence. I didn't know this was happening until later when Isadora Vane told me herself, but the story matters because it changed everything. Isadora Vane was 55, Ashford's younger sister, living in an Upper East Side apartment that was elegant but not ostentatious. She'd kept herself carefully separate from the family's more public displays of wealth. That evening, she was laying out her dress for the next day's wedding. Navy blue conservative, the kind of thing you wear when you want to be present but invisible. Her daughter Amara watched from the doorway. Amara Griffin, 28. Biracial, brilliant, and kept secret from most of the Vane family. Not because Isadora was ashamed of her, because she knew what the family would do to them both if they knew. Mom, Amara said, "You've been different all week, quieter. Is everything okay with Uncle Ashford's wedding?" Isadora had told me later that this was the moment she knew she couldn't keep lying. Not to Amara, not anymore. "It's just, big family events are complicated," Isadora said carefully. "You know that. I know you keep me away from them because of who my father was," Amara said. "But I'm 28 now, Mom. I can handle complicated." Amara picked up her mother's phone from the dresser. The wedding guest list was still open on the screen. 400 names, Manhattan society, old money, and knew all the people Ashford wanted to impress. She scrolled through it, curious about the world her mother came from but never brought her into. Then she stopped at one name. Imara Voss. Amara read aloud. "Do you know her?" Isadora's hands went still on the dress fabric. Amara was already Googling. Her generation does that, sees a name and immediately searches for context. Within seconds, she found articles about the Magnolia Adult Learning Center in Savannah, Georgia. Photos of a 57-year-old Black woman who founded a literacy nonprofit that served adults who'd never had access to formal education. "Mom, she seems extraordinary," Amara said, reading from her phone. "Founded the center in 2015 to serve adults who never had access to formal education. That's beautiful work. Why would Uncle Ashford invite someone like this to his wedding?" Isadora's voice went very quiet. "I know who she is." What's her connection to our family?" The question Isadora had been dreading for 30 years. Mothers teach their daughters what the world owes them or what they owe the world despite its unfairness. Isadora sat down on her bed, looked at her daughter, this brilliant, compassionate woman she'd raised alone, protected fiercely, kept hidden from a family that would have judged her for the circumstances of her birth. Amara had her father's dark skin and her mother's vein bone structure. She was everything the Vanes claimed to value, intelligent, educated kind, and everything they would reject because she didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. Looking at Amara, Isadora saw what I must have looked like 32 years ago. Young, hopeful, believing that fairness existed, believing that good people were protected by the simple fact of their goodness. Isadora told me later, I would say when I recounted this, that she looked at her daughter and saw me at 25, believing the world was fair, believing good people were protected. Amara had that same faith in justice. Isadora had given her that by keeping her away from the Vane family, but Isadora had taken my faith by helping them destroy me. "Mom, you're crying," Amara said, alarmed. "What's wrong? Who is this woman? How many times can you stay silent before silence becomes who you are?" Isadora had asked herself that question for 32 years. She'd intercepted my letter in 1993 when she was 23, terrified of her mother Constance, desperate to please her family. She'd watched me be erased and said nothing. She'd let her brother marry another woman knowing he had 3 children he'd never met. Every year the silence had gotten easier, until now, until her daughter was asking questions with eyes that deserved honest answers. "Amara," Isadora said slowly, "I need to tell you about something I did 30 years ago, something unforgivable." "Okay. Your uncle is marrying a woman tomorrow, but there's someone else who should be standing in that room, someone I helped erase." Isadora told her everything. The marriage between Ashford and Amara in 1990, The medical fraud, the fake adultery photos, the psychiatric hold, the forced NDA, and then the part Isadora had carried alone, the letter. In 1993, Isadora had been living with her mother while working at a gallery downtown. A letter arrived addressed to Ashford at his private office. Their mother was in Europe. Isadora opened it, thinking it might be urgent business. Instead, she found my words. "I think I'm carrying your child. You deserve to know the truth." Isadora had panicked. Called Cordelia Thorne her brother's ex-girlfriend, who was still part of their social circle. Together, they'd decided the letter was a trap, an attempt to get money, a lie that would damage Ashford's reputation. They destroyed it. "I was 23, Isadora told her daughter. "I was terrified of Mother. I thought I was protecting Ashford. But I knew—" Her voice broke. "I knew your grandmother had lied about Imara. I'd seen the real medical records by accident. I knew Imara was telling the truth, and I destroyed the letter anyway." Imara sat very still. For 32 years, I convinced myself it didn't matter," Isadora continued. "That Ashford wouldn't have wanted to know, that I was young and scared. But tonight, seeing you read about Imara Voss, seeing you admire her work, I realized something." "What?" "If I stay silent tomorrow," Isadora said, "if I let this wedding happen without speaking, I teach you that silence in the face of injustice is acceptable, that protecting family image matters more than truth, that women like Imara and women like you, Imara, can be erased when convenient. I cannot teach you that lesson." Imara looked at her mother for a long time. Then she asked one question, "Will you be at the wedding tomorrow?" Isadora nodded. "Then so will I," Imara said. "And you're going to tell the truth in that room, Mom, because that's what you just taught me. Truth is for." Wednesday night, hours before Isadora and Imara made their decision in Manhattan, Everett came to my porch and asked the question that would define everything. "Are you doing this for revenge or so your children can hold their heads high?" I'd been packing for the trip to New York. My suitcase lay open on my bed with the black dress I'd chosen. Simple, dignified, not mourning, but not celebration either. The kind of thing you wear when you're reclaiming space you were told you didn't deserve. Everett sat in the chair beside me, the same one he'd sat in 32 years ago when I was pregnant, and terrified and had nowhere else to go. He'd aged well, gray hair, deeper lines, but the same steady presence that had made him the only person I'd trusted back then. "Revenge would feel good for about 5 minutes, he said. "Then you'd have to live with what you became to get it." I looked out at the magnolia tree my mother had planted, the one that had survived hurricanes and droughts and 3 decades of my silence. "I'm not going to ruin anyone's wedding," I said carefully. "I'm going to take back what they took, not money, not Ashford, just the truth. For 32 years, other people have been telling my story. The unstable wife, the infertile woman, the one who disappeared. Tomorrow I'm going to tell my version and let people decide which one makes more sense." Everett nodded slowly. "That's the difference, then, between destroying someone and just existing honestly in front of them. I'm tired of being the ghost in other people's narratives," I said. "I want to be real, even if being real is uncomfortable for them." He handed me the wooden box containing the copy of my 1993 letter. "Then take this and go tell it, and know that whatever happens, you're not doing it alone. Revenge is a fire that burns the person holding it. Justice is a mirror that forces everyone to see what they've become." That same evening in Manhattan, Cordelia Thorne was having her own reckoning. Cordelia was 56, a Manhattan socialite who'd known Ashford since they were children in the same social circles. She'd dated him briefly in college, watched him marry me, watched that marriage implode, waited decades for him to be ready again. Tomorrow, she would finally become Mrs. Ashford Vane. Except tonight, rereading her prenuptial agreement for the 3rd time, she noticed something she'd glossed over during the initial review with attorneys. Clause 14. In the event that either party is involved in marital fraud, conspiracy to defraud, or willful concealment of material facts related to prior marriages or offspring, all inheritance rights, Spousal support provisions and shared asset claims shall be immediately nullified. She read it twice, then called Beckett Lorne. Beckett Lorne, 54, was Vane Holdings' corporate counsel, not Ashford's personal attorney, but the man who protected the company's interests. He'd drafted this prenup. He answered on the second ring. "Cordelia, everything all right?" "Clause 14, she said. "Walk me through what it protects him from if something from his past surfaces tomorrow." The silence lasted 5 seconds too long. She understood immediately. "He's been planning his exit from me before he even proposed, hasn't he?" Her voice was remarkably calm. "This clause isn't standard marriage protection. It's specifically designed to protect him if someone claims he has hidden children or committed fraud in a previous marriage." "Cordelia, I can't discuss client strategy." "I'm not asking about strategy," she said. "I'm asking if the man I'm marrying tomorrow has been treating this marriage like a limited liability contract from day one." Beckett said nothing, which was answer enough. Cordelia hung up, looked at herself in the mirror, thought about the letter Isadora had given her in 1993, the one from Imara saying she was pregnant. The letter Cordelia had destroyed because Isadora had convinced her it was a shakedown, a lie, an attempt to trap Ashford. What if it hadn't been a lie? What if tomorrow someone showed up with proof? Cordelia had helped bury a letter, and Ashford had made sure that if that burial ever got exposed, she would be the one left with nothing. At midnight in a Manhattan hotel suite, my children and I gathered for final preparation. The table looked like a legal war room. Caius laid out DNA test results, medical records from 1992 drafted lawsuits that would never be filed but would be presented as evidence. Zara opened her laptop showing the 8,000-word investigation article ready to publish the moment she hit send. Lauren placed the evidence-bagged medicine vial, Opaline's 32-year-old proof, on the table, with the reverence it deserved. No one spoke for a long moment. The night before, battle warriors don't speak. They sit with the weight of what they're about to do and make peace with it. DNA, medical fraud, witness testimony, financial records, legal violations. Caius said quietly, "Everything is documented and verified. 3 separate grounds for lawsuit. Any one of them would be enough. 3 news outlets will have reporters there," Zara added. "The article publishes the moment I hit send. It'll be everywhere before they can even think about damage control." Lauren touched the vial gently. "This is what Constance Vane used to drug you in October 1992. Opaline kept it for 32 years. The lab confirmed the sedative. It matches the medication found in Constance's medical records from the same time period." I looked at the evidence spread across the hotel suite table. 32 years of lies now documented, verified, ready to be exposed. I looked at my 3 children, all 32 years old, all brilliant in their fields, all using their skills to dismantle the system that had tried to erase me. "Are you sure?" I asked them. "Once we do this, there's no taking it back. This will be public, permanent. Your names will be attached to this forever." Caius looked at me with his father's eyes in my face. "Mom, they took 32 years from you. We're giving you 1 night to take them back." Lauren nodded. "We're Voss, not Vane. We built that name ourselves. Let everyone know what it means." Zara closed her laptop. "I've been waiting 4 years to tell this story. It's ready." We sat in silence, 4 people who'd been carrying different pieces of the same truth, finally ready to put them together. The next morning, the Vane family would prepare for a wedding. 400 guests would arrive expecting champagne and vows. Ashford would stand at an altar believing he was finally erasing the past. He didn't know that in a hotel room 5 blocks away, 4 people were laying out 32 years of evidence on a table. We weren't preparing for a wedding. We were preparing for a trial. I arrived at the Vane Grand Hotel ballroom at exactly 6 o'clock on Thanksgiving evening, alone, wearing a simple black dress and carrying 32 years of silence. I was about to break. The hotel suite where my children waited was 5 blocks away. We'd separated intentionally. I would enter first alone, the ghost they'd tried to erase. My children would follow later, the proof they'd never expected. The ballroom was exactly what I'd imagined, opulent in the way old money prefers white lilies and crystal vases on every table, chandeliers casting warm light over 400 guests in formal attire. Manhattan's elite gathered to witness Ashford Vane's second chance at marriage done right. The staff member checking names at the entrance looked down at her tablet, then up at me with barely concealed discomfort. "I'm Mara Monroe," I said, giving my maiden name as listed on the invitation. She found it, hesitated. "You're at table 38 near the service entrance." I looked where she pointed. The table closest to the kitchen doors, partially obscured by a decorative column. The least prestigious location in the entire ballroom. Deliberately placed where I could be present, but invisible. Where I would see everything, but be seen by almost no one. The name card on the table read Mara Monroe, former associate of the Vane family. Not former wife, not guest, former associate. As if I'd been an employee who'd resigned, not a woman who'd been systematically destroyed. "Perfect," I said to the staff member. "I won't have far to go when I need to leave." I sat down, placed my small purse on my lap, and surveyed the room with the calm of someone who'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. The ballroom buzzed with conversation, people greeting each other, complimenting dresses, discussing holiday plans. None of them knew that tonight would be the story they'd tell for years. Dignity is a weapon they can't take from you. You have to give it away. I wasn't giving mine away. At 6:30, Cordelia Thorne appeared. She was elegant in cream silk, her hair perfect, her jewelry understated and expensive. She walked past my table, paused, and looked down at me with practiced politeness. "Imara," she said as if we were old friends. "I'm glad you could make it. Some chapters need a proper ending." I met her gaze calmly. "I couldn't agree more. It takes a certain kind of grace to attend your replacement's wedding," she continued. "I admire that." "I'm not here to watch anyone get replaced," I said. "I'm here to witness an ending." She smiled, not understanding. She thought I meant my own ending, that I was here to finally close the door on my past with Ashford, to give my blessing, or at least my silent acceptance of what he'd become without me. She was wrong. Cordelia moved on to greet other guests. I sat at my table near the kitchen and watched the room fill. I recognized some faces from 32 years ago, older, now grayer, but still the same people who'd smiled at me at parties and then whispered behind my back when the marriage fell apart. They'd believed every lie the Vanes told. Tonight they would learn what truth looked like. At 7 o'clock the lights dimmed, classical music swelled, and Ashford Reginald Vane walked onto the stage. He was 59 now, still commanding in the way powerful men are. Silver hair, immaculate tuxedo, the kind of confident posture that comes from a lifetime of people listening when you speak. He'd aged well. Money does that, cushions you from the wear of worry. He took the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his voice filling the ballroom with practiced ease. "Thanksgiving has always been about gratitude, and tonight I am grateful to stand before the people who matter most and say I have finally found what a vain man deserves." Applause. Murmurs of approval. Some guests glanced at me. A few smirked. They all knew who I was and what I represented, the mistake that came before. The woman who hadn't been good enough. The practice run before the real thing. I'd spent 32 years being afraid of his voice. Tonight I was going to watch it fail him. Ashford continued talking about legacy, about building something that lasts, about the importance of the right foundation. Every word was calculated. Every pause was practiced. He was selling them a story, the story of a man who'd overcome a youthful mistake and was now ready for his real life to begin. I looked straight up at him on that stage, and I didn't look away. Let him see me. Let him remember the woman he'd tried to erase still existed, still breathed, still had eyes that could meet his without flinching. For a moment, just one moment, his gaze swept over the room and landed on my table. Our eyes met across 32 years and 400 witnesses. I saw something flicker in his face. Not guilt, recognition maybe, or calculation. Then he looked away and continued his speech. He finished to thunderous applause. Guests raised their champagne glasses. Someone shouted, "Congratulations." The wedding ceremony was about to begin. Cordelia would walk down the aisle, vows would be exchanged, and Ashford Vane would officially close the chapter on his past. The room applauded him. 400 people celebrating the man who destroyed my life. I sat perfectly still, reached into my purse, and took out my phone. Typed one word to Caius Now. Pressed send. Set the phone face down on the table. The ballroom doors at the far end opened. The classical music continued. Guests were still applauding, still raising their glasses, still focused on the stage, where Ashford stood, accepting their congratulations. No one noticed at first. They were too busy looking at him. But I noticed. 3 people walked through those doors in formal attire, not rushing, not dramatic, just walking with purpose toward the center of the room. The entire ballroom would turn to look at them in approximately 15 seconds. And when they did, everything would change. I sent the text and set my phone face down on the table. The ballroom doors opened at the far end of the room. No one was paying attention, yet they were all watching Ashford on stage, raising their glasses to celebrate the man of the hour. They didn't see the 3 people walking through those doors. But I did. My children had arrived. 3 people walked through the ballroom doors, and the resemblance was so undeniable that the room went silent before anyone understood why. Caius, Lauren, and Zara, all 32, all in formal black attire, walked slowly through the ballroom. Not rushing, not dramatic, just purposeful measured steps toward the table where I sat alone near the kitchen. The first heads turned at 20 feet. By 30 feet, entire tables were staring. By the time my children reached 50 feet, the murmuring had started low at first, then building like a wave. Who are they? Look at their faces. Do you see it? They had Ashford's face structure. His eyes, that particular shade of gray-blue that photographs well. His bearing, that vain confidence that comes from generations of money and certainty. Caius had his jawline. Lauren had his height and the way he carried his shoulders. Zara had his expression when concentrating that slight furrow between the eyebrows. Anyone who'd known Ashford Vane in his 20s could see it. 3 versions of young Ashford walking through a ballroom full of people who remembered exactly what he'd looked like 32 years ago. My 3 children walked toward me with the calm of people who'd spent their entire lives preparing for this moment without knowing it. They reached my table, stopped. Then slowly they turned to face the room standing behind me like an answer to a question no one had thought to ask. The silence was complete. On stage, Ashford still held the microphone. His expression hadn't changed, still composed, still commanding, but his left hand tightened on the microphone stand until his knuckles went white. A woman at the front table said loudly enough to carry, "They have his face, all 3 of them." Cordelia Thorne turned pale. She looked from the stage to my table and back again. I watched her mind work through the math, the timing, the resemblance, the fact that I was sitting here with 3 adults who looked like her fiancé. She understood before Ashford said a word. Beckett Lorne, sitting at the corporate table with other Vane Holdings executives, stood slowly. I could see his attorney's brain already calculating how to separate this scandal from the company, how to protect the institution from whatever was about to happen to the man. Genetics doesn't lie the way people do. You can deny words, rewrite stories, destroy documents, but you can't erase a face. In his breast pocket, Caius carried one more piece of evidence, a digital recorder, holding a 30-year-old audio file. Ashford's former personal assistant, a man named Gerald Fitch, had recorded the call in 1993 as personal insurance and kept it on a deteriorating cassette tape for decades. When the lawsuits were announced publicly the week before, Fitch had contacted Caius through Marcus Whitfield's office and handed over the original tape without conditions. "I should have done something with it years ago," Fitch had said. Better late than never. Caius moved first. He walked calmly toward the stage stairs. No one stopped him. Everyone was too shocked. Security stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene in what was clearly a family matter unfolding in front of 400 witnesses. He climbed the stairs with the same measured pace he'd used walking through the ballroom. walked directly to the wedding table where Ashford stood, placed a manila folder on the table in front of him. Ashford looked down at the folder but didn't touch it. Caius opened it for him, pulled out a single document, held it up so the front tables could see the letterhead Gentech Diagnostics, DNA Paternity Analysis. Then Caius spoke into the microphone, his voice carrying across the ballroom with perfect clarity. Ashford Reginald Vane, biological father of Caius Lauren and Zara Voss. Probability of paternity 99.9999%. This test was conducted by Gentech Diagnostics 3 days ago using hair samples from all parties. He paused. Let it sink in. The probability of error is 0.0001%, statistically impossible to dispute. Caius set the document down on the table in front of Ashford. The scientific proof, the undeniable evidence, witnessed by 400 people and verified by a laboratory that had no stake in this family's drama. You've met us before? Caius continued. You just didn't know our names. Ashford looked at the document, then at Caius, then at Loren and Zara still standing behind my table. His face remained composed, but I could see the calculation happening, weighing options, considering strategies, deciding how to respond. 10 seconds passed. 15. The ballroom was absolutely silent except for the faint sound of classical music still playing from speakers no one had thought to turn off. Then Ashford spoke. This is a stunt, he said into the microphone, his voice steady. She sent you here to extort money from me on my wedding day. The word landed like a bomb. Extort. Not these are my children. Not I need to understand what's happening. Extort. Caius's expression didn't change. DNA doesn't extort, Mr. Vane. It simply tells the truth. I don't know who put you up to this. Ashford continued, his voice hardening. But you're not getting a cent from this family. We're not here for money, Caius said quietly. We're here because we exist, and we're tired of pretending we don't. He looked at his own DNA results and called them extortion. 400 people had just watched a man presented with scientific proof that he was the biological father of 3 32-year-old adults, and his immediate response, his instinctive reaction, was to call it blackmail. Not shock, not confusion, not even curiosity. Extortion. The word told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't going to confess. He wasn't going to apologize. He wasn't going to acknowledge the truth even when it was documented by a laboratory and standing in front of him with his own face. He was going to fight. I watched from my table near the kitchen as my son stood on that stage with calm dignity, and my ex-husband chose denial over truth in front of everyone who'd ever mattered to him. Cordelia had her hand over her mouth. Beckett Lorne was already typing on his phone, probably to the corporate PR team. Guests were whispering frantically to each other. Someone near the back pulled out their phone to record. Ashford Vane stood on stage holding DNA evidence proving he was the biological father of 3 32-year-old adults, and his first response was to call it extortion. 400 people heard him choose denial over truth. That word extort told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't going to confess. He wasn't going to apologize. He was going to fight. Good, because we'd brought evidence he couldn't fight. Lauren moved next. While Ashford was still processing the word extortion, my middle son walked calmly to the stage, carrying his laptop. He connected it to the ballroom's projection system, the same system meant to display wedding photos. The massive screen behind the wedding party lit up. Twin medical documents filled the display side by side. The left document was labeled Imara Monroe, Dr. Reginald Ash, October 1990. The right document, Ashford Vane Fertility Diagnostics, NYC, October 1990. The juxtaposition was surgical, methodical, damning. Lauren's voice cut through the ballroom with the precision of the physician he was. I'm an OB/GYN specializing in reproductive medicine. I read these reports every day. Let me translate what you're seeing. He pointed to my records on the left side of the screen. Imara Monroe's reproductive panel from October 1990. Hormone levels optimal, ovarian function normal, uterine health excellent. The physician's notes conclude, all parameters within expected range. No complications detected. My hands were shaking. 32 years of shame and doubt projected 50 feet high for 400 people to see. But I kept my face composed. Lauren moved to the right side. Ashford Vane's fertility assessment from the same month, same time period. Sperm count significantly below normal range. Motility severely compromised. The medical term is oligospermia. He let that sink in. This condition, Loren continued, makes natural conception difficult, but not impossible. With medical intervention, patients can often father children. But in 1990, for a family obsessed with bloodline and heirs, this diagnosis would have been seen as, he paused, unacceptable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The pieces were connecting. Ashford hadn't just destroyed me to escape an inconvenient marriage. He'd destroyed me to hide his own medical condition. Cordelia Thorne's face went white as she stared at the screen. Her wedding gown rustled as she turned slowly to face Ashford. Isadora Vane suddenly stood from her seat and walked to the projection screen. She reached out and touched the displayed documents with her fingertips as if she could verify their authenticity through touch alone. "I remember this," she said, her voice breaking. Someone handed her a microphone. "I remember Mother asking Ashford why you left so suddenly. He said you were mentally unstable, that you'd made wild accusations. I believed him." She turned to face the ballroom, to face me. "I believed him," she repeated, "and I helped bury the letter that might have changed everything. I'm sorry." The silence was absolute. Then Cordelia spoke, her voice carrying across the ballroom without a microphone. "Did you know?" She was looking at Ashford. "When you married me, did you know about this fraud?" Ashford said nothing. "Answer me," Cordelia said louder. "Did you know that your first marriage ended because you paid a doctor to destroy a woman's reputation to cover your own medical condition?" Still nothing. I watched Cordelia's face change comprehension, replacing confusion, then rage replacing comprehension. Her entire wedding had been built on a man capable of this level of deception. Zara moved to the laptop next. "There's one more piece of evidence," she said, "from the man who committed the original fraud." She pressed play. Dr. Reginald Ash's face filled the screen. 70 years old oxygen tubes in his nose, hospital gown, the unmistakable look of someone in their final days. The date stamp showed September 2022, 2 months ago. "My name is Dr. Reginald Ash." The recording began, his voice rattling with effort. "In October 1990, I was approached by Constance Vane with a proposal. She needed documentation that her daughter-in-law, Imara Monroe, was infertile." The ballroom went deadly quiet. "Mrs. Vane offered me a substantial payment to falsify medical records," Dr. Ash continued, "to suppress her son Ashford's actual test results showing fertility complications and to create fraudulent documentation claiming Imara Monroe was permanently infertile." He coughed, struggled for breath, continued. "I accepted. The payment was $85,000 transferred from a Vane Holdings subsidiary account to my practice in May 1990. $85,000. The number hung in the air. The ballroom lights suddenly brightened to harsh fluorescent. Hotel security had arrived, called by panicking guests. The romantic amber lighting vanished, replaced by institutional glare that made everyone look exhausted and old. The fairy tale wedding had become a crime scene under interrogation lights. "I knew what I was doing was wrong," Dr. Ash said on the video. "I destroyed a woman's life for money. I'm recording this confession because I cannot die with this on my conscience. The transfer records are included with this file. Everything is documented." The video ended. Ashford's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. Isadora Vane was the first to shout. "You knew," she was screaming at her brother. "You've known this entire time, and you let us believe she was the problem. You let us treat her like—" Guests were standing now, some fleeing toward the exits, some pressing closer with their phones out, recording everything. The scrape of chairs, the chaos of voices, the flash of camera phones turning the ballroom into a media circus. Ashford backed toward the stage exit, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the champagne-soaked marble. Then Cordelia removed her engagement ring, set it deliberately on the wedding table. removed her wedding band, the one they'd planned to exchange, in 20 minutes. She walked past Ashford without looking at him, walked down the stage stairs, walked directly to my table, extended her hand to me. "I want to hear everything," she said quietly. I stood, looked at Ashford on that stage, frozen between denial and flight, looked at my 3 children standing behind me, solid and unbreakable, looked at 400 people who'd come to celebrate a wedding and instead witnessed the unraveling of a 32-year lie. I walked to the microphone. $85,000 in 1990. I said into the silence. Adjusted for inflation, that's $198,000 in today's money. My lawyer has calculated the interest on that amount over 32 years. I paused, let the numbers sink into the room. But we can discuss that in court, along with my 3 children's inheritance claims to the Vane estate. Ashford's face drained of color. "You have 3 heirs, Ashford," I said, "and I have 32 years of patience." Zara's fingers moved across her tablet screen and the ballroom projection shifted from Dr. Ash's frozen face to a spreadsheet labeled Vane Holdings Subsidiary Transfers 1990. The document filled the screen in brutal clarity. Line after line of financial transactions, each one time-stamped and documented. My daughter had spent 4 years building this case, and now she was presenting it like a prosecutor. September 12, 1990. Zara said, her voice steady. "Transfer from Vane Holdings Medical Investments, LLC to Reginald Ash Medical Practice. Amount $85,000. She zoomed in on the relevant line. The subsidiary name was clearly visible. The account numbers, the authorization signatures. Vane Holdings Medical Investments, LLC, Zara continued. A subsidiary controlled by the Vane Family Trust. This wasn't personal money. This was corporate assets used to commit fraud. The shift was seismic. This wasn't just Ashford Vane's crime anymore. This was institutional fraud, corporate conspiracy. Every shareholder, every board member, every executive who'd benefited from Vane Holdings over the past 32 years was now potentially implicated. Beckett Lorne's face drained of color. I watched him realize what this meant not just for Ashford, but for the entire corporation he'd spent decades protecting. The liability wasn't personal anymore. It was institutional. He leaned toward Ashford, whispered urgently. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his expression. "This changes everything. The corporation is liable. Shareholders, board members, everyone." Ashford shook his head, tried to wave him off. But Beckett was already standing phone in hand, walking toward the exit. Every guest watched the attorney abandon his client in real time. "Even his lawyer is running," someone said loudly enough to carry. Isadora Vane stood and followed Beckett, grabbing his arm before he reached the door. "Is my trust protected from this?" Her voice was sharp with panic. "Answer me. I need to call the liability insurers," Beckett said, pulling free. "Now." He disappeared through the ballroom doors, the corporate council fleeing the sinking ship while 400 people watched. Ashford stood alone on the stage. His support structure, legal, familial, social, was collapsing in real time. I watched him calculate his options, saw the desperation building behind his eyes. Before I tell you what Ashford said next when his back was against the wall, comment A, if you think he'll confess the truth, or B, if you think he'll deflect blame to someone else. Add your reason in just 5 to 10 words, so I can see how you're reading this. Please note what follows includes some recreated dialogue and details for narrative purposes, but the core truth remains. Then Ashford seized the microphone. "My mother," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "my mother controlled the family finances. She made decisions without consulting me. I was 28 years old. I didn't question her methods." He was blaming Constance, his dead mother who couldn't defend herself or contradict his story. She was obsessed with the Vane legacy. Ashford continued, his voice gaining strength. "With bloodlines and heirs and reputation. I didn't know about the payments until years later. By then Imara was gone and there was no way to—" "Stop." Caius's voice cut through the ballroom. He walked to the stage carrying a small digital recorder. "You want to blame your dead mother," Caius said. Then let's hear what 28-year-old Ashford actually said. This recording is from June 1993, 3 years after the divorce, 3 years after Mother allegedly orchestrated everything without your knowledge. He pressed play. The audio quality was decent, clearly recorded on a landline phone, the kind people used before cell phones became ubiquitous. 2 male voices, one unmistakably Ashford's. Does it matter what's true? Ashford's voice said through the speakers, "The Vane name is what matters. She's gone, the problem is solved, the records are sealed. No one is going to dig up a divorce from 3 years ago." I heard my own name on that recording. Ashford saying, "She's gone, the problem is solved." I realized he'd never seen me as a person, just as a problem to eliminate. The unidentified voice on the recording said something inaudible. Then Ashford again. "The trust fund was Mother's idea, but I approved it. We can say we tried to help her if this ever surfaces. Charity to a disturbed ex-wife." Caius stopped the recording. "You weren't a victim, Ashford," Caius said quietly. "You were the architect." Cordelia Thorne whispered from her seat near the stage. "He's still lying, even now." The ballroom was silent except for the ambient noise of 300 people breathing, shifting, waiting to see what would happen next. Ashford stood at the microphone, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound emerged. He tried to speak, tried again. Nothing came out. It was the most powerful silence of the night. 300 people watched a man realize he had no defense left, no story that could save him, no version of events that would make sense, now that they'd heard his own voice from 1993, admitting he'd known he'd approved, he'd managed the cover-up. The DNA proved he was their father. The medical records proved he'd hidden his own condition while destroying my reputation. The financial documents proved he'd used corporate assets to commit fraud. And now the audio recording proved he'd actively managed the conspiracy for years, not just passively accepted his mother's decisions. Every defense had been systematically dismantled. Cordelia Thorne stood, removed her veil slowly, deliberately, let it fall to the floor in a pool of white tulle. She walked toward the stage, and I could see in her face that she was about to say something. The abandoned bride preparing to make her own statement. Ashford still stood frozen at the microphone, unable to produce sound, watching his wedding, his carefully constructed future, disintegrate around him. The ballroom doors opened, not the gilded main entrance, but the service entrance near the kitchen. A trembling woman in her late 60s stepped into the frozen tableau, clutching a faded handbag to her chest, like a shield. Her coat was worn at the elbows, her hands shaking as she scanned the crowd. I didn't recognize her at first. Then she met my eyes, and I knew. Opaline Marsh, the housekeeper who'd worked at the Vane estate from 1987 until 1991, who'd brought me tea on silver trays and smiled sadly when Constance insisted I was unwell. She disappeared 3 weeks after I signed the NDA, leaving no forwarding address. Caius straightened, hands still on the laptop. "Ms. Marsh," he said clearly, "thank you for coming. Please tell everyone what you told me last week." Opaline's voice cracked. "I worked for the Vane family for 4 years. I cleaned their house. I served their meals. I kept their secrets because I needed the job." She fumbled with her handbag clasp. "But I can't take it to my grave." The silence had weight now, the collective held breath of 300 witnesses. Opaline pulled something from her bag, a small glass vial, amber-colored with a faded pharmacy label. October 1990. Mrs. Constance Vane called me to her sitting room and handed me this, told me to dispose of it, burn it, make sure no one ever found it. But I kept it. Her voice broke. "Insurance, proof." Lauren moved toward her, took the vial carefully, held it to the light. His face went very still. "Bromocriptine," he said quietly, then louder. "Bromocriptine. It's used to treat Parkinson's and certain tumors, but it has a significant off-label effect. It disrupts prolactin production and can interfere with ovulation and implantation. If someone took this regularly without medical need, especially after conceiving..." He didn't finish. The ballroom tilted beneath my feet. The tea. The afternoon tea, Constance Vane insisted I drink every day during those final weeks, the tea that always tasted faintly bitter, despite the honey. The tea I'd drunk because refusing seemed ungrateful, seemed paranoid, seemed like proof I really was unstable. She told me, Opaline said, voice steadier now, that Ms. Voss had a condition that required management, said Dr. Ashe prescribed it, said it was for everyone's good. Her hands twisted her handbag strap. But I saw Ms. Voss getting thinner, sadder, crying when she thought no one was watching, and I saw Mrs. Vane smile every time she poured that tea. The room erupted not in noise, but in movement, a ripple of horror spreading like a shockwave. Someone gagged. A woman whispered, "Oh my God!" Zara's hand found my shoulder and squeezed hard. Ashford stared at the vial like it was a gun. "That's you can't prove it's been 30 years. "I had it tested," Caius said. "Last week. The compound is still identifiable. The pharmacy label still legible. Filled October 4th, 1990, prescribed by Dr. Reginald Ashe for Constance Vane, not for Imara Voss. Your mother poisoned the woman carrying your child." I gripped the table edge, trying to breathe through nausea and rage. They hadn't just lied, they'd poisoned me. Fed me drugs that sabotaged my body, made me believe I was broken when they were breaking me. Ashford. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Isadora Vane stood, champagne abandoned face carved from marble. "Ashford, it's over, stop." Ashford turned to his sister like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. "Isadora, thank God. Tell them Mother acted alone." "You knew." Isadora's voice didn't rise, but it silenced him completely. "You knew about the medicine. You knew about the doctored records. And you knew—" her voice cracked. "You knew when I gave you Imara's letter in 1993, the one she sent telling you about the children, the one I intercepted from Father's desk and brought to you because I thought you'd do the right thing." My heart stopped. The letter. The letter I'd sent to Ashford's father, the desperate attempt to reach past the NDA. The letter I'd assumed Howard Vane destroyed, but he hadn't. Isadora had. "I was 26, Isadora said, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I was young and stupid, and I believed in family loyalty above everything. You told me destroying that letter was protecting the family name. You told me those children were better off never knowing their father, and I believed you." She looked at me directly, eyes red and raw. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've spent 30 years trying to convince myself I did the right thing. I can't anymore. Not after meeting you. Not after seeing what we took from you." The ballroom went silent again, anticipatory, breathless. Isadora turned back to Ashford. "I have a daughter. She's 28 years old. Her father was a man I loved who my family said wasn't appropriate for a Vane. They paid him to leave. They told me I'd disgrace the family if I kept her." Her voice strengthened. "But I did keep her in secret, away from this poison, away from this legacy of lies. Her name is Imara, one letter different from the woman my family tried to erase, and I will not let her inherit this legacy of destruction." Cordelia moved. She'd been standing frozen beside Ashford throughout everything, the DNA results, the medical records, the confession, the recording. Now she lifted her veil, fully unpinned it from her hair, and let it fall to the floor in a puddle of white silk. Then she stepped between Ashford and Isadora, her back to her groom, her face toward the woman who'd just confessed to decades of complicity. And she chose a side. Cordelia turned from Isadora to face Ashford directly. Her voice cut through the ballroom chaos with surgical precision. "Did you know she was pregnant when you let her go?" The question landed like a physical blow. 300 guests went silent. Ashford stood frozen at the microphone, his face the color of old paper. Cordelia didn't wait for an answer. She crossed the space between them, heels clicking against marble, and stopped close enough that he couldn't avoid her eyes. You told me she was unstable, that children weren't yours to worry about. Did you know she was pregnant when she left?" The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. Ashford's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It was complicated. "That's not an answer." Cordelia's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Actually, it is. You knew." She turned to face the crowd, speaking to 300 witnesses. He knew, and he let her go anyway. Signed the papers, paid the money, made sure she'd never come back, while she was carrying his child. I gripped the table, edge my knuckles white. Hearing someone else say it, someone who'd loved him, someone who'd stood beside him an hour ago in white silk and promises made it real in a way 30 years of grief hadn't. Cordelia turned back to Ashford, and her voice dropped to something intimate and devastating. "I thought I was marrying a man who'd made mistakes, who'd let family pressure push him into bad decisions." She stepped closer. "But you were never going to be free, Ashford, because you never let her go." The entry twist hit me like cold water. She was right. The invitation. The front row table labeled former associate. The way he'd stared at me during the ceremony like he was seeing a ghost he'd summoned on purpose. This wasn't revenge or closure or even cruelty. This was obsession. 32 years of obsession dressed up as moving on. "You invited her here," Cordelia said quietly, "to your wedding. To the moment you were supposed to be starting fresh, and I was stupid enough to think it was about proving you'd won." She laughed again, the sound breaking on the edges. "You invited her because you've never stopped thinking about her, which means I was never your bride. I was your audience." Movement near the ballroom entrance drew every eye. Everett Kane. My private investigator walked through the crowd carrying a wooden document box. He'd testified at depositions, delivered evidence to Caius, done the quiet work that built our case. Now he placed the box on the table in front of Ashford with deliberate care. Certified copy of a letter Imara Voss mailed to Howard Vane in March 1993. Everett said clearly, postmark delivered received, authenticated by 3 independent document examiners. He opened the box and removed a single sheet of paper sealed in archival plastic. The handwriting was mine, younger, more desperate, but unmistakably mine. Caius took it, read it silently, and his jaw tightened. Then he handed it to me. I hadn't seen this letter in 32 years. I'd written it at 2 a.m, 3 months pregnant, terrified and alone in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and the neighbor's cigarette smoke. The words blurred as I read them aloud, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. "Dear Mr. Vane, I know the NDA forbids contact, but there's something you need to know. I think I'm carrying your son's child. You deserve to know the truth, even if you never want to see me again. The baby is due in September. If Ashford wants to be involved, I'll find a way to make it work within the legal constraints. If he doesn't, I'll raise this child alone and never contact your family again. But he deserves to know. Sincerely, Imara Voss." The ballroom was silent except for the rustle of fabric as someone shifted. I set the letter down, my fingers numb. "Your father received this," I said to Ashford. "Isadora confirmed it. She gave it to you directly, and you did nothing." Cordelia picked up her veil from where it had fallen. The white silk pooled at Ashford's feet like a surrender flag he didn't deserve, and dropped it deliberately into the nearest trash receptacle. The gesture was small, final, irreversible. "How many more lies are left?" she asked. Isadora moved to the projection laptop, her movements precise despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "From Ashford's private safe," she said. "The one he thought no one else could access. The one he had installed in his study behind the false panel. The one where he kept things that mattered." She pressed a key. The projection screen lit up. The image filled the wall, a wedding photograph. Ashford and me, 1990 young and smiling and stupidly hopeful. My dress had been simple ivory silk bought on sale. His tuxedo had been his father's tailored to fit. We'd looked happy. We'd looked real. The photograph was worn at the edges, clearly handled repeatedly over decades. I could see the faint creases where someone's fingers had gripped it, the way the corners had softened with time and touch. A guest whispered, "He kept her wedding photo this whole time." Another voice sharper, "Through his whole second marriage." Was I ever that naive, or was I just that desperate to believe love could survive a family like his? I stared at my own young face on the screen. 25 years old, believing promises, thinking the Vane name meant security instead of destruction, and couldn't recognize the woman I'd been. Ashford stared at the image like it was burning him. His hand lifted toward the screen as if he could touch the past, and I saw it shake. "I was 28, he said, voice cracked and broken. "I didn't know how to—" "You knew enough to bribe a doctor," Lauren said coldly, "to poison her, to keep her photo for 3 decades while pretending she never existed." Cordelia removed her engagement ring, then her wedding band. The soft click of platinum against marble echoed in the silence as she set them on the table. "I'm done." Ashford's face crumpled. No more deflection, no more blame. Just a man confronting 32 years of choices he couldn't undo, displayed on a projection screen the size of his life. Isadora pressed another key. The next image appeared an ultrasound photo, grainy, black and white, 3 distinct shapes visible in the frame. In the bottom margin, written in my younger handwriting, 3 heartbeats, ABC, April 1993. Ashford collapsed into his chair. The room erupted. Beckett Lorne walked back into the ballroom holding a manila folder. The crowd noise, gasps, whispers, the rustle of 300 people, reacting to the ultrasound image still projected on the wall, died as he crossed the marble floor. He didn't go to Ashford. He walked directly to the microphone. "For the record," Beckett said, voice clear and professional, "I represent Vane Holdings Corporation, not Ashford Vane personally." The distinction landed like a blade. Ashford lifted his head from where he'd collapsed in his chair, face gray. "Beckett, what are you—" "The board of directors held an emergency teleconference 17 minutes ago." Beckett opened the folder, extracted a single sheet of letterhead, and held it up for the room to see. "They have authorized me to announce an immediate internal investigation into all corporate transactions connected to the events described tonight. Vane Holdings will cooperate fully with any legal proceedings and has already begun separating Mr. Vane's personal actions from institutional liability. It was corporate self-preservation dressed up as accountability. Beckett wasn't defending his client. He was throwing him overboard to save the ship. The entry twist hit everyone in the room at the same moment Ashford's own attorney had just abandoned him. Not quietly, not privately, but in front of 300 witnesses at his wedding. Kaya stood slowly, his lawyer's instincts recognizing blood in the water. "That's a remarkable timeline, Mr. Lorne. 17 minutes ago, you made that call before the ultrasound was even shown." Beckett's face remained neutral. "The board acts in the corporation's best interests." "The board knew," Zara said, her phone already recording, "about the fraud, about the cover-up, and they're cutting ties now because it's public, not because it's wrong." A woman in the front row, someone I recognized from Society, pages of Vane Holdings board member, stood and walked toward the exit without a word. 2 more followed. The exodus had begun. Beckett set the folder on the table and extracted another document. "There's one more matter requiring disclosure." He glanced at Ashford, and something almost like pity crossed his face. In 2007, Ashford Vane established a trust fund. It's labeled Monroe Triplets Educational Trust. Assets currently valued at $2.4 million. Never disbursed, never claimed, never publicly acknowledged. The ballroom went absolutely still. Monroe, not Voss, not even Anonymous or John Doe. A fake surname, a pseudonym chosen deliberately to hide 3 real children behind a comfortable fiction. Lauren spoke first, his doctor's voice tight with controlled fury. "You've known for 15 years, not just suspected known. Known our names, known we existed, known where to send money if you'd ever decided to acknowledge us. And you did nothing. It was... Ashford's voice cracked. I was trying to protect yourself, I finished. The word came out quiet, but it carried. I stood without needing a microphone. The ballroom fell silent. 32 years of silence had taught me how to make quiet sound like thunder. I looked at Ashford directly, not with hate, not with rage, but with the devastating calm of someone who'd finally stopped needing his validation. You didn't lose your children because I left. You lost them because you chose to. Every single day for 32 years, you chose to. You could have fought the NDA. You could have ignored your mother's poison and your father's pressure. You could have opened that trust fund and found us. I turned to face the audience, Manhattan's elite in silk and diamonds, the same people who'd called me unstable in 1990, who'd whispered about my breakdown at charity galas I'd never be invited to again. 32 years ago, people in rooms like this called me unstable, infertile, unworthy. Today I'm returning that verdict to the man who earned it. My voice didn't shake, didn't rise, didn't perform. After 3 decades of silence, the truth needed no amplification. I didn't come here to destroy a wedding, I continued. I came to bury a lie that said I was broken when they were the ones who broke me, a lie that said my children didn't exist when they were standing right in front of him. I placed my hands on Lauren's shoulder, then Caius's, then Zara's. Living proof, breathing refutation of 32 years of convenient fiction. You built an empire on that lie, Ashford. Now you get to watch what happens when the foundation cracks. Cordelia moved. She'd been standing frozen beside Isadora, but now she walked to the gift table where her engagement ring sat beside her wedding band. She picked them both up, crossed to the head table, and placed them carefully on the white tablecloth. She didn't look at Ashford. She didn't say a word. She just walked toward the exit, her bridesmaid trailing behind her, and the sound of her heels on marble was the only noise in the entire ballroom. 300 phones buzzed in unison, the sound of a scandal going viral in real time. People pulled out devices, screens lighting up faces in the dimmed ballroom. It's everywhere, someone whispered. Front page, vain wedding scandal. Zara Voss broke it, another voice said. Full article, photos, documents. Zara stood beside me, phone in hand, and I saw the headline on her screen. Vain wedding reveals 32-year medical fraud and hidden heirs. Publication timestamp 4 minutes ago. She'd been drafting it in real time, waiting for the perfect moment to hit send. The Vain Holdings board members stood as a group, 5 men and women in expensive suits who'd profited from Ashford's name for decades and filed toward the exit. One of them paused beside Beckett. Emergency session tomorrow 9 a.m., damage control and succession planning. The crowd began to disperse, not fleeing exactly, but evacuating with the studied casualness of people who didn't want to be photographed at the scene of a disaster. Servers stood frozen with champagne trays. The string quartet had packed up their instruments 20 minutes ago. Someone had turned off the projection screen, but I could still see the ghost of that ultrasound image burned into my vision, 3 heartbeats in April 1993 proof Ashford had held in his hands and chosen to ignore. Ashford stood alone on the wedding stage where he should have married an hour ago. Wilting flowers in crystal vases, abandoned champagne glasses, lipstick marks on the rims, white tablecloth scattered with the debris of celebration, interrupted crumpled napkins, half-eaten cake programs no one would keep. He looked small up there, diminished. A man who'd spent 40 years building an empire of lies and 40 minutes watching it collapse. I turned to leave with my children, Caius on my left, Lauren on my right, Zara slightly ahead with her phone still recording. Everett Kane fell into step beside us, the wooden document box under his arm. Opaline Marsh waited near the door, her worn coat buttoned against the November cold. For the first time in 32 years, I didn't look back. The lawsuits arrived like coordinated artillery. Medical fraud, corporate malfeasance, intentional infliction of emotional distress. 3 separate complaints filed in 3 jurisdictions on the same December morning, 7 days after the wedding that never happened. Caius spread the documents across my kitchen table like battle maps. "We're not negotiating anymore," he said. The first complaint targeted Ashford personally for orchestrating medical fraud. The second went after Vane Holdings for using corporate funds to execute the cover-up. The third sued Cordelia Thorne. I blinked. Cordelia. Destruction of evidence. Caius said, "Isadora confirmed Cordelia helped Ashford destroy your letter in 1993. She wasn't just a deceived bride. She knew about the triplets 6 months ago and actively helped conceal it." The entry twist landed cold. Cordelia hadn't just worn white silk and played victim. She'd been complicit, helping Ashford hide 3 children he'd abandoned, helping maintain the lie that had defined my life for 3 decades. "Will she fight it?" I asked. "Her attorney called this morning. She wants to settle." Caius shuffled papers. Beckett Lorne has been remarkably helpful. He's providing internal Vane Holdings documents to establish corporate liability, separate from personal liability. The board wants Ashford gone. The television in my living room played news coverage on mute. Zara's expose had been shared 2 million times in 48 hours. Vane wedding scandal had become shorthand for dynastic corruption. I watched a clip of protesters outside Vane Holdings headquarters holding signs that read, "Where are the Monroe triplets?" and "Justice for Imara." "This isn't just a scandal anymore," Zara said from the doorway, reading her phone. "It's a movement." She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, the manic energy of someone running on deadline adrenaline and rage. "CNN wants an exclusive interview. So does 60 Minutes. And somebody started a GoFundMe for your legal fees that's raised $340,000 in 3 days." I didn't know what to say to that. Strangers funding lawsuits for a woman they'd never met, outraged on behalf of children, stolen by paperwork and poison. Lauren leaned against my kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Ashford's attorney called me yesterday. He wants to meet, all 3 of us, without you." "Do you want to?" I asked. "I don't know," Lauren admitted. "Part of me wants to hear what he could possibly say. Part of me thinks there's nothing worth hearing." "We meet him Tuesday," Caius said. "Conference room, neutral territory. We'll see what he has to offer." 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, my 3 children sat across from their father in a Manhattan law office conference room. I wasn't there. They told me about it later over dinner at Loren's apartment. The 3 of them taking turns filling in the story like witnesses reconstructing an accident. Ashford had looked smaller in person than on the ballroom stage, thinner, grayer. He'd walked in without an entourage, without Beckett, just a man in an expensive suit that didn't fit right anymore. "I knew you existed for 15 years, he'd said. No preamble, no excuses. "I was a coward. That's the truth you deserve." Caius had leaned forward. "You know what you owe us." "Everything," Ashford had answered. "I owe you everything." The conversation had been stiff, painful, without easy resolution. Caius negotiated like he was deposing a hostile witness. Lauren set boundaries in the careful language of someone who'd spent years helping patients establish healthy relationships with family members who'd harmed them. And Zara had stood mid-sentence, her chair scraping against tile, and walked out of the conference room without looking back. The daughter who dealt in truth couldn't negotiate with lies made flesh. Lauren had watched her go, but hadn't followed. "You can't buy back time," he'd told Ashford. "You understand that, right? Whatever money changes hands, it doesn't give us childhoods where you existed." "I know," Ashford had said. Caius had pushed a document across the table. "Then let's talk about what you can do instead of what you can't undo." 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I sat across from Isadora Vane in a small cafe in Midtown Manhattan. The space smelled like coffee grounds and cinnamon, the kind of neighborhood place where regulars knew the barista's name and tourists never found. Steam rose from 2 mugs between us. Isadora wrapped her hands around hers without drinking. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I'm not sure I deserve to ask, but I needed you to see me say it. I was wrong." I watched her stir sugar into coffee she wouldn't drink and wondered, is this what healing looks like? Or just two women who survived the same war sitting in the same room? "You intercepted a letter that would have changed 4 lives," I said quietly. "You knew I was pregnant and you helped Ashford hide it for 30 years. Yes, no excuses, no explanations, just acknowledgement." "I hear you," I said, "but I won't perform forgiveness for your comfort. That's not something I owe you today." Isadora flinched but nodded. "I understand." We sat in silence. The cafe hummed with afternoon noise, espresso machines, hissing chairs, scraping conversations overlapping in the comfortable chaos of strangers sharing space. Outside the window, December light slanted gold across the street, catching on car windows and puddles left by last night's rain. "Can I buy you another coffee?" Isadora asked finally. I looked at her Ashford sister, my children's aunt, a woman who'd done terrible things and was trying to sit with the consequences without demanding absolution. "Yes," I said. "We weren't reconciled. We weren't friends. But we were present, and maybe that was enough for today." Isadora's phone buzzed on the table between us. The name on the screen, Amara. She looked at the phone, then at me, something uncertain in her eyes. A question. Permission maybe, or just acknowledgement that this conversation her daughter might echo involved me whether I'd chosen it or not. The phone kept buzzing. Outside traffic moved past in the gathering dusk. Isadora answered the call. I watched her face soften as she spoke to Amara quietly, with the careful tenderness of a mother who'd hidden her daughter from family poison for 28 years. Their conversation was brief private. When Isadora hung up, she looked at me and said simply, "She wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet her someday. Not now. Someday." I'd nodded. Someday felt manageable. 1 month after the wedding confrontation, Everett Kane sat on my porch in Savannah without an evidence box for the first time in 2 years. Just a man with coffee in a chipped mug and no agenda. The December air smelled like pine needles and wood smoke from someone's fireplace down the street. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. We'd spent 2 years building a case together, hours of research depositions, evidence chain documentation, strategic planning, and now the work was done. The silence felt strange without it. "How do you feel?" Everett asked finally. I considered the question, really considered it the way I hadn't allowed myself to do in 32 years. Like I put down something very heavy. I said slowly, "And now I don't know what to do with my hands." Everett smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes. He was 63, gray-haired and solid, with the patient calm of someone who'd spent decades investigating other people's tragedies without flinching. "Rest them," he said. "That's allowed. Permission to stop fighting. I'd forgotten what that felt like." "You've been waiting a long time," I said, looking at him directly. We'd never named what existed between us, the long dinners that stretched past midnight, the way he'd held my hand during the hardest depositions, the careful way we'd both avoided acknowledging anything that felt like promise while I was still fighting. Everett set his coffee mug down on the porch railing. "I wasn't waiting," he said gently. "Waiting implies expectation. I was just here. There's a difference." The entry twist settled over me like warm water. He hadn't been counting days until I was free cataloging patience like currency to be repaid. He'd just been present, with no conditions, no debt. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Receive something without owing something back." "You practice," Everett said. He extended his hand, palm up on the space between our chairs, an invitation without pressure. I looked at his hand, weathered, steady, asking for nothing. Then I placed mine on top of it. My fingers didn't shake. For the first time in memory, my body was still. This is what it feels like when someone asks for nothing, I thought, when presence is the entire gift. Early January brought cold rain and the first real family dinner I'd hosted in my modest Savannah dining room. The table was crowded with mismatched chairs borrowed from neighbors and plates that didn't match 4 different patterns because I'd never needed a set for more than 2, and Caius carved the roast chicken I'd bought from the grocery store deli because I'd never learned to cook for crowds. Lauren poured wine. Zara commandeered my tiny kitchen to make something she called actually edible vegetables with butter and garlic that made the whole house smell like comfort. Everett sat at the head of the table, not because he'd claimed the position, but because Zara had physically steered him there, saying, "You're basically Family Kane. Sit down." The conversation was aggressively, beautifully normal. Caius complained about opposing counsel in a patent case. Lauren talked about a surgical resident who kept mixing up instrument names. Zara showed us her phone, a text from a source about political corruption in New Jersey, and debated whether the story was worth pursuing. This was the ordinary I'd been denied for 3 decades. Dinner conversation about nothing and everything. People talking over each other, laughing, reaching for bread, existing in the casual intimacy of family without performance. "Do you regret it?" Lauren asked, suddenly looking at me. How we did it, the wedding, the public exposure, all of it. I considered the question while Caius and Zara went quiet forks suspended. "I regret the 32 years before," I said finally. "I don't regret 4 days of truth." "Good," Zara said firmly, "because I'd do it again." Caius refilled his wine glass. "There's something we need to tell you." He glanced at Lauren, then Zara, some silent agreement passing between them. The court officially recognized us as Ashford Vane's legal children and heirs 3 weeks ago. Paternity established. Inheritance rights confirmed. I nodded. I'd known this was coming. Caius had explained the legal process in detail. "But we're keeping Voss as our surname," Lauren said. The exit twist landed quietly, but it landed. "Monroe was your maiden name," Caius explained. "Vane is his legacy. But Voss," he gestured at the 3 of them, "Voss is ours. We built it," Zara added. "The name, the reputation, the careers, everything attached to those 5 letters we made. Not inheritance, not bloodline. Us. You gave us Voss," Lauren said, looking at me, "and we turned it into something that means strength, intelligence, integrity. We're not trading that for Vane Holdings and a trust fund with a fake surname." I felt something crack open in my chest, not breaking but opening like a door I'd kept locked for decades, finally swinging wide. My children had been offered the Vane Empire, the dynasty, the name that opened doors and commanded rooms. And they'd chosen the name I'd given them in a studio apartment that smelled like mildew, the name I'd written on birth certificates with shaking hands, the name that meant nothing except us. "We built Voss," Caius said simply. "We keep it." I smiled. Genuinely smiled, the expression pulling muscles I'd forgotten how to use. Around my crowded dining room, Everett pouring coffee, Caius arguing case law with Lauren about liability standards, Zara showing them all her draft article about corporate accountability reforms. I realized this is what winning looks like. Not the empire I destroyed or the man I defeated. This. A table full of people who chose each other, mismatched plates and borrowed chairs and a roast chicken from the deli. Conversation that mattered and conversation that didn't. Laughter without agenda. Presence without debt. I looked at my hands resting on the table, 57 years old, wrinkled and worn, finally still, and felt like I was waking up. The ribbon stretched across the doorway of the new building in Savannah, red against white brick, and I held the scissors without trembling. 3 months had passed since the wedding that never happened. 3 months since I'd walked out of that ballroom without looking back. 3 months to build something that couldn't be destroyed. The January air smelled like magnolia blossoms and fresh paint. 30 people stood on the sidewalk, prospective students, mostly older adults who'd come because the flyer said, "Never too late," in letters big enough for aging eyes to read. Caius, Lauren, and Zara stood beside me. Everett held the ribbon taut. "This building," I said, voice steady and clear, is named for my mother, Constance Voss. She taught me that education is the one thing no one can take from you. She taught me to read when I was 4 years old, sitting on our porch in the evening, while fireflies lit up the Georgia dark. She told me words were freedom. I positioned the scissors at the ribbon's center. So this place is for anyone who wants that freedom. Anyone who was told they were too old, too poor, too far behind. Anyone who needs a second chance at the one thing no one can take away. The scissors cut clean. The ribbon fell. The small crowd applauded not the polite golf claps of Manhattan charity galas, but real noise from real people who understood what a door opening actually meant. An elderly woman approached me as the crowd filtered inside to tour the classrooms. She wore a worn cardigan and clutched a purse like a shield. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I'm 70 years old. My whole life I've been pretending I can read signs and menus. My daughter fills out my forms. Is it too late for me?" I took her hands. "Never. It's never too late." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and walked inside. Kaya stood beside me, watching the students explore the bright classrooms with donated computers and secondhand books I'd spent 2 months collecting. "His hush money is teaching people to read," he said quietly. "I hope he knows that." "He knows," I said. "That's why it matters." The center was funded entirely by the legal settlement and the trust fund Ashford had established for the Monroe Triplets, money meant to keep secrets now paying for transparency in education. Every dollar he'd set aside to hide his children was now building something that couldn't be destroyed by lawyers or NDAs or family pressure. Lauren joined us carrying 2 cups of coffee from the small break room we'd set up for students and tutors. "You built something he can never touch," he said. "That's the real victory." I looked at the building, modest, functional, nothing like the marble monuments the Vanes erected to their own names. This was better. This was mine. In Manhattan, that same afternoon, Ashford Vane sat alone in his apartment. No longer CEO. No board meetings. No Cordelia. No children who answered his calls. The place smelled like cleaning solution, and the faint staleness of rooms no one lived in, only occupied. He crossed to his study and opened the private safe behind the false panel, the safe where he'd kept what mattered. The wedding photo from 1990, the ultrasound image, the documents he'd hidden from everyone including himself, but the safe was empty. Isadora had taken everything months ago, turned it all over as evidence. Every guilty memento, every secret treasure, every piece of proof that he'd remembered when he'd claimed to forget, gone. He stared at the void for a long time. 40 years building an empire, 40 minutes watching it collapse, and now this, an empty safe in an empty apartment, in a life that felt like someone else's story. "I built an empire in 40 years, he said to no one. The words disappeared into silence. He closed the safe, put on his coat, walked to the door. For the first time in his life, he didn't know where he was going. Late January afternoon, I stood before my parents' graves in a small Georgia cemetery. Winter sun slanted through bare tree branches. Magnolia buds were starting to show, not yet blooming, but promising. The graves were simple. My mother's Constance Monroe Voss, 1945 to 2008, beloved mother and teacher. My father's Raymond Voss, 1943 to 2012. He kept fighting. I knelt and placed a white magnolia bloom on my mother's headstone. The petals were soft against my fingers, waxy and perfect. "I took back my name, Mama," I said quietly. "Your name. And my children will never bow their heads for someone else's lie. They're building lives that can't be bought or silenced. You would love them." I touched my father's stone. "I kept fighting Daddy, just like you taught me. I didn't let them make me small. I didn't let them make me quiet." Behind me, Caius Lauren Zara, and Everett stood at a respectful distance, giving me space, but staying present. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth and winter flowers preparing to bloom. I realized I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't fighting, just standing in a cemetery on a beautiful day with people I loved, and that was enough. This is peace, I thought. Not the absence of war, but the presence of people who chose to stand with me. I stood slowly, knees protesting the 57 years they'd carried me through, and turned from the graves. My 4 loved ones waited backlit by winter sun, patient and solid. Caius in his lawyer's coat, Lauren with his doctor's calm, Zara with her phone in hand and fire in her eyes, Everett with coffee and quiet strength. They'd stood with me through the worst. Now they'd stand with me through whatever came next. "Ready?" Zara asked as I approached. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." We walked together toward the car, leaving the cemetery behind. I didn't look back. I'd spent 32 years carrying the past like stones in my pockets, weighing me down with every step. Today I was walking into the future with empty hands and a full heart. The winter sun was warm on my face. The air smelled like magnolias about to bloom. My children flanked me, not the inheritance I'd been promised, but the legacy I'd built. Everett's hand found mine, and for the first time in 3 decades, I felt like myself, whole, free, home. And to you, listening to my story, remember this: the truth has its own timeline. For 32 years, I carried silence like a stone. I thought keeping quiet was survival, that bowing my head would protect my children from the vain family's reach. I was wrong. Don't make my mistake. Don't let anyone convince you that your truth is too dangerous to tell. Silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. Stories like mine, revenge-cheating stories, where the wronged finally confront those who destroyed them, matter because they show that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. True family stories aren't about bloodlines. They're about people who stand with you when everything falls apart. I believe God's timing brought me to that ballroom for a reason, not just for vindication, but to show anyone carrying a similar burden that you don't have to carry it forever. These revenge-cheating stories and true family stories remind us our voices matter, that truth survives even when buried. If this story moved, you please leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my position. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you appreciate stories that show the power of standing up for truth, please subscribe to Her Vengeance. Your support helps me share these important messages with others who need them. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Please remember that while this story contains fictional elements for narrative impact, the heart of it, the lesson about truth, family, and justice, is what matters most.